Imagine waking up one morning, checking your bank account, and realizing that all the money you worked your whole life to save has evaporated. Millions of Americans went through this exact nightmare, and yet very few talk about it today. Welcome to The Rational Historian, where we uncover the hidden truths of history that still impact your life. Today, we're diving deep into the U.S. policy that quietly bankrupted millions and reshaped the country forever. Before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, so you don't miss our weekly deep dives into the shocking financial stories history tries to hide. Back in the 1930s, the United States was already struggling through the Great Depression. Banks were failing, unemployment was skyrocketing, and millions were losing hope. But what most people don't realize is that the government, in its effort to stabilize the economy, implemented a series of policies that ended up making the situation far worse for ordinary Americans. The key policy in question revolved around currency manipulation, forced gold surrender, and banking restrictions, all designed to try and save the financial system. On the surface, it looked like a bold move to prevent total economic collapse, but underneath, it had devastating consequences for the average citizen. The story begins with President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his administration, who faced a nation in crisis. Banks were collapsing daily, and the fear of a complete financial meltdown was palpable. Roosevelt declared a national banking holiday, temporarily shutting down all banks to prevent mass withdrawals. While this move calmed some panic, it also set the stage for a radical shift in how Americans could hold and use their wealth. Most importantly, it marked the beginning of a policy that would strip millions of their savings almost overnight. At the heart of this policy was the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. A law that required citizens to turn in virtually all of their gold coins, bullion, and certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper money. On the surface, it seems straightforward: trade gold for cash. But here's the catch. The government immediately revalued gold, devaluing the dollar in the process. This meant that Americans who had worked and saved in gold found their wealth drastically reduced. The money they held was no longer worth what it had been the day before. Imagine putting aside your life savings, thinking you were secure, and then watching it lose a significant portion of its value because of a government mandate. Millions of Americans faced exactly this scenario, often without any warning or understanding of what was coming. Historians rarely highlight these stories, but the impact was real, and it left scars that lasted for decades. In many ways, it was a hidden form of wealth redistribution, one that quietly transferred power and resources from ordinary people to the government and large financial institutions. This is the kind of story the rational historian exists to tell. Most history lessons focus on political battles or wars, but rarely on the subtle economic moves that changed millions of lives overnight. This isn't just a tale from the past, it's a warning, a lesson, and a story about power, trust, the fragility of wealth in a complex financial system. The repercussions of these policies were staggering. Farmers, small business owners, and retirees suddenly found their savings worth far less than the day before. Those who had kept gold under mattresses, in safes, or as family heirlooms were forced to hand it over to the government at prices set by the Treasury. This wasn't a voluntary transaction. It was mandatory, backed by the threat of fines or even imprisonment. And while the government argued this was necessary to stabilize the currency and protect the economy, the immediate effect on ordinary Americans was catastrophic. At the same time, banks were being pressured to exchange gold holdings for paper currency at the same devalued rates. Financial institutions, some already on the brink of collapse, received government support, but regular citizens saw their hard-earned assets vanish in value. The policy was cloaked in the language of recovery and protection, but it effectively penalized anyone who had responsibly saved during the hard times of the late 1920s and early 1930s. It's also important to understand the broader context. America was struggling with deflation, unemployment, and economic instability. The government's goal was to increase liquidity to make more money available for lending and spending. In theory, this should help the economy recover. In practice, however, the sudden confiscation and revaluation of gold created distrust in the banking system. People became wary of banks, hesitant to save, and fearful that their money could disappear again tomorrow. These psychological impacts often lasted longer than the immediate financial loss, shaping how generations viewed money and saving. For millions, this policy felt like a betrayal. Many who had invested in gold as a safeguard against economic collapse suddenly felt powerless. Entire families had their financial futures wiped out. And the government's narrative of economic salvation did little to console them. Yet most mainstream history books skip over these stories. They focus on New Deal programs, public works, and political victories, while the personal devastation of ordinary citizens remains in the shadows. This is why stories like these matter. They remind us that economic policies, while abstract in textbooks, have tangible, sometimes tragic effects on real people. The rational historian exists to bring these hidden consequences to light. Connecting the dots between policy decisions and human lives, the 1930s were more than just a backdrop for political reform. They were a test of trust between citizens and the institutions meant to protect them. And in many ways, that trust was broken. As you watch this, think about how wealth and savings are not just numbers in an account. They represent decades of effort, sacrifice, and planning. And when policies suddenly change the rules without warning, the impact can be devastating.
How?
This story is not just about the past. It echoes into our present, reminding us to always question the systems around us. Beyond gold, the policies also affected loans, mortgages, and everyday financial contracts. Many banks, now stabilized by government intervention, started foreclosing on properties and businesses that couldn't keep up with the new financial landscape. The Depression-era policies, designed to protect the economy, often shifted burdens onto the weakest members of society. Families who had been prudent and responsible found themselves punished, while larger institutions emerged stronger. There's a striking lesson here about unintended consequences. When the government moves to fix a financial system, the results can be both immediate and long-lasting. The 1930s policies created winners and losers, and rarely did the average American find themselves on the winning side. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust, fairness, and the sense that the rules of the economy were stable. For millions, those rules suddenly didn't apply. The gold policy also had ripple effects across generations. Retirees who relied on savings to support themselves in old age found their plans disrupted. Young people entering the workforce faced a precarious economy with unstable banks and uncertain financial futures. Families who thought they had prepared for hard times were forced to start over, often with little support. The economic trauma of the 1930s shaped a generation's approach to money, risk, and government promises. It's a lesson that resonates even today. Economic policies, no matter how well-intentioned, can have ripple effects far beyond what policymakers predict. And yet, these stories remain underreported. Most documentaries focus on political drama or major wars, but the silent suffering of millions caused by economic policy is rarely explored. This is why the rational historian exists, to tell the untold stories, the ones that connect policy to real lives, and to help us understand the true cost of decisions made in Washington, D.C. Even decades later, historians continue to debate the effectiveness of these policies. Some argue that the gold confiscation and banking reforms were necessary to prevent total collapse. Others point out that millions suffered unnecessarily, and that the human cost was far greater than often acknowledged. What's undeniable is that ordinary Americans people, just like you and me, paid the highest price. As we reach the conclusion of this story, it's clear that the U.S. policy of gold confiscation and financial restructuring during the 1930s was more than just a historical footnote. It was a transformative event, one that reshaped wealth, trust, and the relationship between citizens and their government. Millions of Americans were bankrupted, lives were disrupted, and the lessons of that era still resonate today. The rational historian believes that understanding these stories helps us better navigate our own financial world and appreciate the human side of history that textbooks often ignore. Before we wrap up, if you found this story shocking or eye-opening, make sure to comment below and share it with friends and family. Discussions about history like this are important. They keep these lessons alive and relevant. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to The Rational Historian for more deep dives into the hidden truths that shaped our world. History is rarely fair, and sometimes the most powerful policies are the ones that quietly affect millions, while making headlines for only a few. The U.S. policies of the 1930s are a stark reminder. that power, money, and policy are never neutral, always have winners and losers. By studying these events, we can better understand not just history, but human nature, trust, and the delicate balance of our financial systems. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, the past isn't just a story, it's a guide. Share this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And stay tuned to The Rational Historian for more hidden stories that history doesn't want you to forget. And with that, we'll end today's journey into one of America's most overlooked economic disasters. But the lessons, they last a lifetime.